April 17, 1944, Fort Bliss, Texas. The harsh desert sun beat down on the dusty parade ground as 23 German women prisoners of war stood in rigid formation, their faces blank with exhaustion after the 3-day journey from New York. The Atlantic crossing before that had been worse, 16 days in the cramped hold of a Liberty ship, constantly fearing Allied submarine attacks that would never come. They believed they were being transported to a special interrogation facility where they would face American brutality, just as they had been warned about in their training. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. None of them could have imagined that their encounter with American black cowboys would not only challenge everything they had been taught about racial hierarchy, but would fundamentally transform their understanding of freedom itself. Hauptsturmführerin Elsa Kruger, formerly of the Women's SS Auxiliary Communications Corps, squinted against the glare as the transport trucks ground to a halt. At 32, she was the ranking officer among the prisoners, captured during the Allied invasion of Sicily while operating a forward communications station. The daughter of a prominent Berlin physician and an early party member, Elsa had risen quickly through the ranks, her dedication to National Socialist principles marking her as a model German woman. She had volunteered for frontline duty, believing it her patriotic obligation to free male soldiers for combat. Now standing in this alien landscape, she felt the weight of responsibility for the women under her command, even in captivity. Eyes forward, shoulders back, she whispered to Greta Muller beside her, a 20-year-old radio operator who had been trembling since their ship docked in New York Harbor. Remember your training. Name, rank, identification number. Nothing more. But Hauptsturmführerin, they say Americans torture female prisoners, Greta whispered, her blue eyes wide with fear. Dr. Goebbels said, Silence, Elsa hissed. The Americans are undisciplined and soft. We are German women. We will show them strength. Captain James Washington observed the German prisoners from the shade of the administration building, his expression unreadable behind government-issued sunglasses. At 38, Washington was a career army officer who had fought his way up through the ranks despite the military's endemic racism. A graduate of Howard University, with a degree in languages, he had been assigned to Fort Bliss to oversee this experimental POW program, the first to include female German military personnel. What do you make of them, Lieutenant? Washington asked the younger officer beside him. Lieutenant Thomas Rodriguez, a Mexican-American officer from El Paso, shrugged. They look tired, sir. But that tall one in front, she's trouble. You can see it in how the others defer to her. I noticed that too, Washington nodded. Intelligence says she's SS, a true believer. This program is under a lot of scrutiny, Rodriguez. The brass at the War Department thinks we're wasting resources, but I believe what we're doing here might be more important than what's happening on the front lines. With all due respect, sir, how do you figure that? Rodriguez asked. Washington removed his sunglasses, his dark eyes serious. Because bullets and bombs can destroy armies, Lieutenant, but to truly defeat an ideology, you have to change minds. That's our mission here, not just containment. As they spoke, a cloud of dust appeared on the horizon, growing larger as it approached the fort. The distinctive sound of hoofbeats carried across the parade ground, drawing the attention of the German prisoners. Right on time, Washington smiled. Sergeant Brooks and his men. Elsa Kruger stiffened as she saw the approaching riders. Though she had never been to America before her capture, she recognized cowboys from American films that had been popular in Germany before the war. What she wasn't prepared for was that these cowboys were black. Sergeant William Brooks led 7 other black soldiers, all members of the 9th and 10th Cavalry, the famed Buffalo Soldiers. In civilian life, Brooks had been a working cowboy on ranches throughout Texas and Oklahoma. Now at 43, he was part of a special detachment assigned to the POW program at Fort Bliss, tasked with teaching the prisoners agricultural and ranching skills as part of their rehabilitation. Hauptsturmführerin, what is happening? Whispered Helga Weber, a 25-year-old former nurse who had volunteered for signals duty. Why are there Negroes on horses and why are they wearing uniforms? Elsa didn't answer. She couldn't reconcile what she was seeing with what she had been taught. In Germany, Propaganda had portrayed black Americans as primitive laborers, not skilled soldiers or horsemen. Yet these men rode with a natural authority that commanded respect, their uniforms impeccable, their bearing military. Captain Washington stepped forward as Sergeant Brooks dismounted. "Ladies, welcome to Fort Bliss. I am Captain James Washington, the commanding officer of this facility. You are now prisoners of war of the United States of America, and you will be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention." Hauptmann Dieter Müller, the only male German officer among the prisoners, stepped forward. At 45, he had been a communications specialist attached to the women's unit, captured alongside them in Sicily. "I am Hauptmann Müller. I demand to speak to a white officer." A tense silence fell over the parade ground. Captain Washington's expression didn't change, but Lieutenant Rodriguez stepped forward, his hand moving to his sidearm. "Stand down, Lieutenant," Washington said quietly before addressing Müller. "Hauptmann, in this facility, you will address me as Sir or Captain Washington. Your first lesson about America begins now. Here, a man's rank, not his race, determines his authority." Washington turned to address all the prisoners. "You are not in a traditional POW camp. Fort Bliss Special Detachment 27 is an experimental rehabilitation program. You will learn agricultural and ranching skills. You will work alongside American personnel. You will be treated fairly and with respect, so long as you follow the rules." Elsa translated for those who didn't speak English, her voice neutral despite her inner turmoil. This was not what they had expected. Where were the chains, the harsh interrogations, the deprivations they had been warned about? "Sergeant Brooks and his men will be your primary instructors," Washington continued. "Tomorrow at 600 your training begins." As the prisoners were led to their barracks, simple but clean quarters that were far better than they had anticipated, Elsa struggled to make sense of their situation. Their captors were nothing like the barbaric Americans described in German propaganda. Most confusing of all was Captain Washington, a black man who spoke perfect German and commanded white officers. "It's a trick," Hauptmann Müller muttered as they settled into their quarters. "They're softening us up before the real interrogations begin. The Negro officers, the decent quarters, it's all psychological warfare." Elsa nodded, though she wasn't entirely convinced. "We must remain vigilant," she agreed. "The women look to us for guidance, Hauptmann. We must show strength." That night, as the desert cooled and stars appeared in the vast Texas sky, Elsa sat on her bunk writing in a small journal she had managed to keep hidden during her capture. The day's events had shaken her more than she cared to admit. "April 17th, 1944, she wrote. "We have arrived at a place called Fort Bliss in Texas. Everything is strange here. The commanding officer is a Negro named Washington who speaks better German than some of the women in my unit. They say we are to learn to be cowboys. I do not understand the Americans' strategy, but I must remain strong for the others. They are watching us, waiting for weakness. I will give them none." What Elsa couldn't have known was that Captain Washington was also writing that evening, his report to the War Department laying out his unconventional approach to this experimental POW program. "The German prisoners arrived today," he wrote. "Initial assessment confirms intelligence profiles. The female SS officer Kruger will be the key. If we can change her mind, the others will follow." Traditional POW protocols have proven ineffective with ideologically committed Nazis. Our approach must be different. By placing them in direct daily contact with black American soldiers in positions of authority and expertise, we hope to undermine the racial theories that form the foundation of their worldview. First impressions suggest deep discomfort with our arrangement, exactly as anticipated. Phase 1 begins tomorrow with basic horsemanship training. Dawn broke over Fort Bliss with the sound of a bugle. Elsa was already awake, having slept poorly on the unfamiliar bunk. She had spent much of the night considering their situation, trying to formulate a plan. Resistance seemed futile given their circumstances, yet cooperation felt like betrayal. For now, she decided they would observe and gather information. At precisely 0600, the German prisoners assembled on the parade ground, where Sergeant Brooks and his men waited with 16 horses. The animals were not the magnificent military steeds Elsa had expected, but sturdy, well-muscled quarter horses. working animals suited to the harsh terrain of West Texas. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen," Sergeant Brooks called out, his voice carrying across the yard. "Today you learn to ride. For some of you this may be familiar, for others it will be new, but everyone starts from the beginning here." Hauptmann Müller stepped forward again. "My people will not take instruction from a cowboy?" Brooks interrupted, his tone pleasant but firm. "That's exactly what I am, sir. Been riding since before I could walk. Broke my first Mustang at 12, worked cattle drives from Texas to Montana. Now you can stand there being offended, or you can learn something that might actually be useful to you." Captain Washington, observing from nearby, nodded slightly to Brooks. This direct challenge to Müller's authority was deliberate, part of the strategy to disrupt the existing power dynamics among the prisoners. "Hauptsturmführerin," Müller turned to Elsa, switching to German. "Tell your women not to participate in this." "Charade." Elsa hesitated. Her instinct was to obey Müller, but she was also responsible for the welfare of her unit. Creating conflict on their first full day seemed unwise. Before she could respond, one of the younger women, Johanna Fischer, a 19-year-old from Munich, stepped forward. "I want to learn," she said in English, surprising everyone. "My grandfather had horses in Bavaria. I rode as a child." Sergeant Brooks smiled. "That's the spirit, miss. Come forward, and we'll get you started." Elsa watched as Johanna approached one of the horses, a chestnut mare with a white blaze. To her surprise, Sergeant Brooks didn't simply assign her the animal. Instead, he spent several minutes teaching Johanna how to approach the horse, speaking quietly as he demonstrated how to let the animal become familiar with her scent and presence. "Horses are like people," Brooks explained, loud enough for all to hear. "They know when you're afraid, when you're kind, and when you're trying to fool them. You can't lie to a horse. They see right through pretending." His words carried a weight beyond the immediate lesson, and Elsa found herself listening intently despite her determination to remain aloof. As Johanna successfully mounted the horse with Brooks' assistance, a spontaneous smile broke across her face, the first genuine emotion Elsa had seen from any of her unit since their capture. One by one, other women began to step forward, their curiosity overcoming their reservations. Even Greta, who had been so fearful the day before, approached a gentle grey gelding under the guidance of Private First Class Marcus Johnson, a young buffalo soldier from Oklahoma. Elsa remained in place, torn between maintaining her ideological stance and the practical reality that cooperation might make their captivity more bearable. As she watched, she noticed Captain Washington approaching. "Not interested in riding, Hauptsturmführerin Kruger?" he asked in perfect German. "I'm observing my unit's security," she replied stiffly. Washington smiled slightly. "I believe the appropriate term is reconnaissance. Smart. Learning about your environment, that's good military thinking." His acknowledgement of her professional approach caught Elsa off guard. She had expected condescension or hostility, not respect. "Where did you learn to speak German so well?" she found herself asking. "My mother was a professor of Germanic literature at Howard University," Washington replied. "I grew up with Goethe and Schiller alongside Shakespeare and Langston Hughes, studied in Berlin for a year in 28, actually. Beautiful city." Elsa blinked in surprise. The idea of this black American officer studying in Berlin, appreciating German culture, contradicted everything she had been taught about the intellectual capabilities of non-Aryans. "Berlin was beautiful," she said finally, the past tense acknowledging what they both knew, that Allied bombing was systematically destroying the city she had once called home. "It will be again," Washington said simply, "after the war." As they spoke, Elsa noticed Hauptmann Müller standing alone, his face darkening with anger as more of the women engaged with the horsemanship lesson. She needed to manage this situation carefully. "Captain, I should join my unit," she said. Washington nodded. "Of course. Sergeant Brooks is an excellent teacher. You might be surprised by what you learn." As Elsa approached the horses, she caught fragments of conversation between Private Johnson and Greta, who was tentatively stroking her gelding's neck. "He's so big," Greta was saying. "Aren't you afraid he'll hurt you?" Johnson shook his head. "Samson here. He's a gentleman. Horses only hurt people out of fear or misunderstanding. Treat them with respect. They'll carry you anywhere you want to go. Even though you're... Greta hesitated, unable to complete the sentence. Black, Johnson supplied with a small smile. Horses don't care about that, miss. They judge you by how you treat them, not what you look like. Wish people were smart enough to do the same. The simple wisdom of this statement hung in the air. Elsa saw confusion flicker across Greta's face, a crack in the certainty that had been instilled through years of Nazi indoctrination. By midday, all but 2 of the women had mounted horses under the guidance of the Buffalo Soldiers. Only Elsa and a hard-faced signals operator named Margaret Steiner remained on the ground, along with Hauptmann Müller, who had retreated to the shade of a nearby building, his disapproval evident. "Your turn, Hauptsturmführerin," Sergeant Brooks said, approaching Elsa with a powerful black stallion. "I saved Thunder here for you. Figured the officer should have the best mount." Elsa eyed the horse warily. It was magnificent, muscular and proud, with intelligent eyes that seemed to evaluate her as she approached. "He's our most spirited horse," Brooks continued. "Needs a strong hand, but he'll give you his heart if you earn his trust." "And how does one earn a horse's trust?" Elsa asked, unable to keep the curiosity from her voice. "Same way you earn anyone's trust," Brooks replied. "Consistency, fairness, patience, no shortcuts." As Brooks guided her through approaching Thunder, Elsa found herself following his instructions with surprising attention to detail. Her military training had emphasized precision and discipline, qualities that, it seemed, translated well to horsemanship. "That's it," Brooks encouraged as she ran her hand along Thunder's neck. "Let him get to know you. Horses remember everything, how you touch them, how you speak, how you move. They never forget kindness or cruelty." When it came time to mount, Elsa did so with the same determination she applied to all challenges. Thunder shifted beneath her, testing. But she remained steady, following Brooks' instructions about using her legs and posture to communicate with the animal. "Well done, Hauptsturmführerin," Brooks said, genuine approval in his voice. "You're a natural." The unexpected praise from this black American, stirred a complex emotion in Elsa. Pride in her accomplishment warred with discomfort at accepting validation from someone her ideology classified as inferior. Yet she couldn't deny the man's expertise or the authenticity of his instruction. As the lesson continued, Elsa found herself increasingly absorbed in the challenge of communicating with Thunder. The horse responded to the slightest shift in her weight, the gentlest pressure of her knees. There was something pure about this interaction. It existed outside of politics, outside of war, outside of the racial theories she had accepted as truth. By late afternoon, when Captain Washington called an end to the day's training, Elsa dismounted with reluctance. Her muscles ached from the unaccustomed activity, but her mind felt clearer than it had in months. The simple focus required by horsemanship had temporarily freed her from the constant tension of captivity. As the prisoners returned to their quarters for the evening meal, Elsa noticed a change in the women. They were tired but animated, discussing their experiences with unexpected enthusiasm. Even Helga Weber, who had been nearly catatonic with stress since their capture, was describing her ride with gestures and smiles. Hauptmann Müller intercepted Elsa before she could enter the barracks. "You disappoint me, Hauptsturmführerin," he said in low German. Participating in their games, allowing our women to fraternize with Untermenschen, the familiar term, subhumans, jarred Elsa after the day's experiences. She had used it herself countless times, but now, having spent hours learning a complex skill from these American soldiers, the word felt somehow hollow. "We are prisoners of war, Hauptmann," she replied carefully. "Our duty is to survive and maintain unit cohesion. Fighting our captors serves no strategic purpose. Our duty is to uphold National Socialist principles under all circumstances," Müller countered. "Or have you forgotten your oath?" Elsa straightened. "I have forgotten nothing, Herr Hauptmann, but I am responsible for these women. If participating in this program keeps them fed, safe, and together until Germany prevails, then that is what we will do." Müller's eyes narrowed. "Be careful. Kruger, I will be watching." That night, as the barracks settled into silence, Elsa returned to her journal. "The Negro sergeant knows horses in a way I have never seen," she wrote. "He spoke of trust and communication as if they were the most natural things in the world. The women responded well to the training. Even Greta seemed to forget her fear for a time. Hauptmann Müller is concerned about ideological contamination. Perhaps he is right to worry. It is difficult to maintain certainty when everything here contradicts what we were told about Americans, about captivity, about the natural order of races. I must be vigilant, not just against their influence, but against my own curiosity." In his own quarters, Captain Washington was reviewing the day's observations with Lieutenant Rodriguez. "Progress with Kruger," he noted. "She's intelligent and pragmatic. Noticed how she watched everything before participating. She's gathering intelligence, evaluating her situation. We can work with that." "Muller's going to be a problem," Rodriguez observed. He was practically vibrating with rage by the end of the day. "Miller is exactly what we expected," Washington replied. "The true believer who can't adapt. He'll either break or become increasingly isolated as the others begin to adjust. Either way, his influence will diminish." "You really think this will work, sir?" Rodriguez asked. "Changing their minds about everything they believe?" Washington considered the question. "Not overnight, maybe not completely, but we're planting seeds, Lieutenant. Cognitive dissonance is powerful. Every positive interaction with Brooks and his men contradicts what these Germans have been taught. Every day they're treated with dignity, despite being prisoners, undermines Nazi propaganda. Reality is the most effective counter-argument to ideology. And the horsemanship training, that's part of the strategy." Washington nodded. "Sergeant Brooks suggested it. Brilliant, really. Puts his men in the position of undisputed experts. Creates a shared experience outside of political context. Builds respect through demonstrated skill rather than imposed authority. Plus, practical skills give the prisoners a sense of accomplishment, something positive to focus on besides their captivity." As the weeks passed, a routine developed at Fort Bliss Special Detachment 27. Mornings were devoted to horsemanship, with the German prisoners progressing from basic riding to more advanced skills. Afternoons included agricultural work in the fort's gardens and fields, where the prisoners grew vegetables for their own consumption under the guidance of Private James Taylor, a Buffalo soldier who had been a sharecropper in Mississippi before the war. Elsa found herself increasingly drawn to the horsemanship training. Thunder had become her regular mount, their relationship deepening as she mastered the subtle communication required to work with such a powerful animal. Sergeant Brooks proved to be a demanding but fair instructor, pushing her to improve while acknowledging her natural aptitude. "You've got a gift, Hauptsturmführerin," he told her one morning after she had successfully guided Thunder through a complex series of maneuvers. "Not everyone can speak horse language so clearly. Thunder respects you." "He's an exceptional animal," Elsa replied, patting the stallion's glossy neck. "Bred for performance, I imagine." Brooks chuckled. "Actually, Thunder was a rescue. Found him half-starved on an abandoned ranch near El Paso. Previous owner beat him badly. You can still see the scars under his mane if you look close. Took months before he'd let anyone near him." Elsa's hand moved instinctively to the area Brooks indicated, finding the raised ridges of old wounds beneath the horse's dark hair. "Yet he trusts you now." "Trusts you too," Brooks pointed out. "Animals don't care about your past, just how you treat them in the present. People could learn from that." The implication wasn't lost on Elsa. As a member of the SS, her identity was inextricably linked to an ideology of racial superiority. Yet here was this horse, this magnificent, intelligent creature, responding to her as an individual, judging her solely on her actions in the moment. The cognitive dissonance Brooks had predicted began to manifest in various ways among the prisoners. Greta Müller, initially the most fearful, had become Private Johnson's most dedicated student, her natural affinity for horses blossoming under his patient instruction. Johanna Fischer, who had been the first to volunteer, now assisted Sergeant Brooks with the newer riders, her fluent English making her an effective interpreter. Even Helga Weber, the former nurse, had found unexpected common ground with Private First Class Samuel Wilson, a medic attached to the Buffalo Soldiers. They had begun exchanging medical knowledge during rest periods, Helga sharing German techniques for treating frostbite developed on the Eastern Front, Wilson demonstrating American methods for preventing heat exhaustion in the Texas climate. Not all the prisoners adjusted as readily. Margaret Steiner remained aloof, participating minimally in the required activities, but refusing to engage beyond what was necessary. And Hauptmann Müller had become increasingly isolated, his rigid adherence to Nazi principles putting him at odds with the practical adaptations the women were making to their circumstances. One afternoon in late May, as a rare thunderstorm gathered on the horizon, Elsa found herself alone with Sergeant Brooks in the stables, securing the horses before the weather hit. Thunder was particularly restless, sensing the approaching storm. "He doesn't like lightning," Brooks explained as he helped Elsa lead the stallion into his stall. "Can't say I blame him. Got caught in a storm like this my first year as a working cowboy. Lightning struck a tree not 20 feet from me and my horse. Poor animal threw me and ran 5 miles before they caught him." "You've been a cowboy your whole life?" Elsa asked, realizing she knew very little about Brooks despite weeks of daily instruction. "Since I was 13, he confirmed. "My daddy was a Buffalo soldier too, 10th Cavalry. Fought in the Spanish-American War, then settled near Fort Huachuca in Arizona. Taught me to ride almost before I could walk." "Buffalo soldier," Elsa repeated. "I've heard the term, but I don't know what it means." Brooks smiled as he checked Thunder's water trough. "Story goes, the Plains Indians called the black cavalry soldiers Buffalo soldiers because our hair reminded them of buffalo fur. Others say it was because we fought as fiercely as the buffalo they respected. Either way, black men have been serving in the U.S. cavalry since right after the Civil War. My daddy's daddy wore the uniform too." This revelation of a multi-generational military tradition surprised Elsa. In Germany, the military heritage of notable families was celebrated, part of the national identity. The idea that black Americans might have a similar sense of service and tradition had never occurred to her. 3 generations, she said thoughtfully. "My father served in the Great War, the First World War, you would say. His father as well, in the Franco-Prussian War." "Military families understand each other, don't they?" Brooks observed, "no matter what side they're on." Before Elsa could respond, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the stable. Thunder reared in his stall, eyes wild with fear. Without hesitation, Brooks pushed Elsa behind him and entered the stall, speaking in a low, soothing voice as he approached the panicked horse. "Easy, boy, easy now. It's just noise, won't hurt you none." Elsa watched in amazement as Brooks gradually calmed the stallion, his presence alone seeming to reassure the animal. Despite the obvious danger, a panicked horse could easily kill a man. Brooks showed no fear, only calm certainty. "How do you do that?" she asked when Thunder had settled. "Do what?" "Make him trust you, even when he's afraid." Brooks considered the question seriously. "Animals know when you respect them, when you see them as they really are, not what you want them to be or what you've been told they are. Same with people, I reckon." The storm passed, but Brooks' words lingered in Elsa's mind. That night she wrote in her journal, "Sergeant Brooks spoke of seeing things as they really are, not as we're told they are. Is that not what is happening here? Everything I was taught about Americans, about black people, about captivity. None of it matches what I see with my own eyes each day. Which is the truth, what I was told or what I see? And if they lied about this, what else might not be as I was led to believe?" June brought scorching heat to Fort Bliss. The horsemanship training shifted to early mornings and evenings to avoid the worst of the sun, with midday hours spent in the shade of the barracks or working in the relatively cool interior of the stables. Captain Washington had introduced an educational component to the program, with English language lessons in the afternoons and optional history classes in the evenings. To Elsa's surprise, most of the women chose to attend these sessions, eager for mental stimulation after months of captivity. Washington himself taught the history classes, offering a perspective on American development that was far more nuanced than anything the prisoners had encountered through German propaganda. "The American experiment has always been a contradiction," he explained during one session. "A nation founded on the principle that all men are created equal, built with the labor of enslaved people. a country that preaches freedom while denying it to many of its citizens. We are a work in progress, constantly struggling to live up to our ideals. This frank acknowledgement of American shortcomings was unexpected. Nazi propaganda had portrayed America either as a mongrelized failure or as a hypocritical plutocracy, but always as an enemy to be despised rather than a complex society with its own internal conflicts and aspirations. After one such class, Johanna Fisher approached Washington with a question that had clearly been troubling her. "Captain, if America believes in equality, why are your Negro soldiers segregated? Why must Sergeant Brooks and his men eat separately and live in different quarters?" A hush fell over the room. It was the question that had occurred to many of the prisoners, but that none had dared to ask. The contradiction between Washington's words about American ideals and the visible reality of racial segregation at Fort Bliss was impossible to ignore. Washington didn't hesitate. "Because America fails to live up to its promises every day, Fräulein Fisher, we fight for democracy abroad while denying full citizenship to millions at home. It's our national shame and our ongoing struggle. The men of the 9th and 10th Cavalry serve a country that doesn't always serve them in return." "Then why do they serve at all?" Elsa found herself asking. "You'd have to ask them that question," Washington replied. "But I suspect each has his own answer. For some, it's family tradition. For others, a way to prove their worth in a society that questions it. For many, it's the hope that their service will help bend the arc of history toward justice, as Lincoln said." This open discussion of America's racial contradictions created a new dimension in the German prisoners' understanding. They had been taught that America's diversity was its fundamental weakness, yet here was evidence that the nation could acknowledge its flaws while still functioning, still fighting, still working towards some evolving ideal of itself. One evening in mid-June, as Elsa was returning to the barracks after checking on Thunder, a privilege Captain Washington had granted her, in recognition of her responsibility, she came upon Private Johnson sitting alone outside the stables, a harmonica in his hands. The melancholy notes of a blues song hung in the twilight air. "That's beautiful," Elsa said, surprising herself with the spontaneous comment. "What is it called?" Johnson looked up, equally surprised to see the German officer. "It's a blues song, ma'am, St. Louis blues. My grandfather taught it to me." Would you play more?" Elsa asked hesitantly. Johnson nodded and began again, the soulful melody speaking of a sadness Elsa could feel without understanding the cultural context. When he finished, they sat in silence for a moment. "Music was very important in Germany," Elsa said finally. "Before the war, I mean. My mother played piano, Bach, Beethoven, Wagner. Good music crosses all boundaries," Johnson observed. "Blues came from slave songs, you know, people with nothing left but their voices, finding beauty even in suffering." The conversation might have continued, but they were interrupted by the approach of Hauptmann Müller. "Fraternizing with the prisoners is forbidden, Private," he said coldly in heavily accented English. Johnson stood immediately. "Just playing some music, sir. No harm in that." "Hauptsturmführerin, return to your quarters," Müller ordered in German. "I will report this incident to Captain Washington." "There is nothing to report." "Herr Hauptmann," Elsa replied, maintaining her composure. "Private Johnson was playing music. I stopped to listen. No regulations were broken." Müller stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You forget yourself, Kruger. You forget what we are, what they are. This familiarity dishonors your uniform, your oath." "We are prisoners of war," Elsa said evenly. "We no longer wear uniforms." "We are National Socialists," Müller hissed. "Always, regardless of circumstance, or have you been so easily turned by American softness?" The accusation stung, partly because Elsa had been increasingly questioning the rigid world-view that had once seemed so certain. Before she could respond, Johnson cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I should get back to my quarters. Thank you for appreciating the music." As Johnson walked away, Müller sneered. "You let a Negro address you as an equal. Disgraceful." "He is a soldier doing his duty," Elsa replied. "As am I. My duty now is to ensure the welfare of our unit under these conditions. Creating unnecessary conflict serves no purpose, Herr Hauptmann. Your duty is to maintain the honor of German womanhood, Müller countered, to uphold the principles of racial hygiene even in captivity. I've watched you, Kruger, seen how you speak with these Americans, how you've allowed the other women to become familiar with them. It's contamination. It's survival, Elsa said firmly, and I will not apologize for keeping my unit alive and well in enemy territory. As she walked away, Elsa realized that for the first time, she had openly defied Müller's authority. More significantly, she had defended her interactions with the American soldiers not as a necessary evil, but as a legitimate choice. Something fundamental had shifted in her perception. In her journal that night, she wrote, "Hauptmann Müller accused me of being turned by American influence. Perhaps he is right, though not in the way he means. I find myself questioning things I once accepted without thought. The Negro soldier's dignity and competence contradict everything we were taught about racial hierarchy. Captain Washington's intelligence and leadership challenge the very foundations of our worldview. What if the Führer is wrong about this? What else might he be wrong about?" These questions would have been unthinkable months ago, tantamount to treason. Yet here, thousands of miles from Germany, surrounded by the vast Texas landscape and people who defied categorization according to Nazi ideology, Elsa found herself increasingly unable to reconcile what she observed with what she had been taught. July 4th brought an unexpected development at Fort Bliss Special Detachment 27. Captain Washington announced that the German prisoners would be permitted to attend the fort's Independence Day celebrations as observers, a gesture of goodwill and an opportunity for cultural exchange. "This is American propaganda," Hauptmann Müller declared when Elsa informed the women of the invitation. "We will not participate." To his evident surprise, Johanna Fischer spoke up immediately. "I would like to go. I've never seen an American celebration. It would be educational." One by one, other women voiced similar interest until only Margaret Steiner and Müller himself remained opposed. It was a clear indication of how much the dynamic within the prisoner group had shifted over the previous months. "Very well," Elsa decided. "Those who wish to attend may do so. Those who do not will remain in quarters. I will accompany the group to ensure appropriate behavior." The celebration was held in a large field adjacent to the fort, with tables of food, a small band, and various games and activities. The German prisoners were given a designated area, but were allowed to move about freely within the larger space, always under the watchful eye of guards, though the security seemed more perfunctory than serious by this point. Elsa observed with fascination as soldiers and their families engaged in the festivities. Black and white personnel remained largely segregated, confirming Washington's acknowledgement of America's continuing racial divisions. Yet there was also interaction, soldiers of different races competing in horseshoe throwing contests, children playing together before being called back to their respective family groups, shared appreciation for the band's music. "It's complicated, isn't it?" Captain Washington said, appearing beside Elsa as she watched. "American racial dynamics, I mean." "In Germany it was presented as very simple," Elsa replied, "a natural hierarchy of races, scientifically proven." Washington nodded. "Nothing simple about human societies, especially not how we construct ideas of race and difference." He gestured toward a group of children playing. "Those kids don't see color until they're taught to. That's not nature, that's culture." Before Elsa could respond, they were interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant Brooks and several other Buffalo soldiers leading their horses. "Captain, we're ready for the demonstration if you'd like to bring our guests over," Brooks called. Washington turned to Elsa. "Sergeant Brooks and his men have prepared something special, a demonstration of cavalry horsemanship. I think you'll find it impressive." The demonstration proved to be extraordinary. The Buffalo soldiers performed a series of complex maneuvers on horseback, showcasing skills that went far beyond what they had been teaching the prisoners. Standing charges, precision formations, mounted shooting exhibitions, all executed with flawless coordination and skill. Elsa watched in genuine admiration. These men were not just competent horsemen, they were elite cavalry, their abilities honed through years of dedicated practice. Around her, she could hear the German women murmuring in appreciation, their respect evident regardless of any lingering ideological barriers. "They're magnificent," Johanna said softly beside her. Why didn't we know about soldiers like these? Because it didn't fit the narrative, Elsa replied, the realization crystallizing as she spoke. If Americans can produce cavalry like this, and with Negro soldiers, then the story we were told cannot be the whole truth. The evening culminated in a fireworks display that lit up the desert sky. As explosions of color bloomed overhead, Elsa found herself standing near Private Johnson, who was watching the spectacle with evident enjoyment. "We have similar celebrations in Germany," she said, surprised at her own impulse to make conversation. "On New Year's Eve particularly, though not so much since the war began." Johnson nodded. "Must be hard knowing what's happening back home, the bombing, I mean." His simple acknowledgement of her concern for Germany touched Elsa unexpectedly. There was no gloating over Allied air superiority, no recitation of Nazi crimes to justify the destruction, just human recognition of what it meant to be far from home while your country suffered. "My parents are in Berlin," she said quietly. "I haven't had news of them for almost a year." "The Red Cross might be able to help with that," Johnson suggested. "They facilitate messages between prisoners and their families. Captain Washington could arrange it, I'm sure." "Thank you," Elsa said, genuinely moved by the offer. "I would appreciate that." As the prisoners returned to their quarters that night, Elsa noticed a different energy among the women. The demonstration of skill by the Buffalo Soldiers had affected them profoundly, challenging their preconceptions in ways that mere words could not. "Did you see how Sergeant Brooks controlled his horse with just his knees?" Greta was saying excitedly to Helga. "No reins at all for those jumps. It was incredible." "And the shooting demonstration," Johanna added. 8 targets in 12 seconds, all while maintaining full gallop. Only Margaret Steiner, who had chosen to attend despite her initial reluctance, remained outwardly unmoved. "It changes nothing," she said flatly. "Trained animals performing tricks. It doesn't alter what we know to be true." "And what is that exactly?" Elsa found herself asking, a challenge in her voice that wouldn't have been there months earlier. Margaret looked startled, then wary. "The fundamental truths of our ideology, Hauptsturmführerin, the natural order that places Germanic peoples at the pinnacle of human development." "And where in this natural order do you place Sergeant Brooks?" Elsa pressed. "A man who can communicate with a 1,000-pound animal using only his thoughts and the pressure of his legs. Who can hit a target at 50 meters from the back of a galloping horse? How does that fit with what we were taught?" Margaret had no ready answer, and Elsa didn't wait for one. The questions weren't really for Margaret anyway. They were the same ones Elsa had been asking herself with increasing frequency. In her journal that night, she wrote, "Today I saw black American soldiers perform feats of horsemanship that would earn commendation in any European cavalry unit. I spoke with Private Johnson about my family in Berlin, and he offered assistance with genuine compassion. Captain Washington discussed American racial complexity with more honesty and nuance than I have ever encountered in political discourse. None of this aligns with what we were taught. If our racial theories are built on false premises, what does that mean for everything else we have accepted as truth?" August brought subtle changes to Fort Bliss Special Detachment 27. As the prisoners demonstrated increasing competence in horsemanship and agricultural skills, Captain Washington introduced new responsibilities. The German women now participated in planning and executing the daily work, functioning less as prisoners and more as contributors to the detachment's operations. For Elsa, this transition brought a renewed sense of purpose. She found herself working closely with Sergeant Brooks to develop a breeding program for the fort's horses, drawing on her pre-war university studies in biology. Their professional relationship had evolved into a mutual respect that transcended their initial positions as captor and prisoner. "You have a good eye for conformation," Brooks told her as they evaluated a young mare. "Could have made a career as a horse breeder in another life." "Perhaps after the war," Elsa replied thoughtfully, "though I doubt there will be much opportunity for such things in Germany for many years." Brooks nodded soberly. "War changes everything, but people rebuild. Always have." "What will you do?" Elsa asked. "After the war, I mean." "Go back to ranching if I can," Brooks said. "Save enough to buy my own spread someday. Army life has its purpose, but my heart's with the horses and open country. This simple aspiration, so human, so comprehensible, further eroded the artificial barriers Elsa had once accepted between herself and people like Brooks. His dreams were not so different from what many Germans might want: a piece of land, meaningful work, independence. The fragile peace of the detachment was shattered in mid-August when Hauptmann Müller attempted to escape. Having grown increasingly isolated as the other prisoners adapted to their circumstances, he had spent weeks secretly preparing. His plan might even have succeeded had it not been for an unexpected encounter with Johanna Fischer, who had risen early to help with the horses. Müller was apprehended less than a mile from the fort. Captain Washington convened a disciplinary hearing the same day, with Elsa present as the ranking German officer. The standard punishment for escape attempts was solitary confinement and loss of privileges, but Washington seemed troubled. "Hauptmann Müller," he said gravely, "you understand that as a prisoner of war, it is your duty to attempt escape. I hold no personal animosity for your actions. However, there are consequences under military law." Müller stood rigidly at attention, his expression defiant. "I recognize no authority from a Negro officer." A muscle twitched in Washington's jaw, the only indication that the insult had registered. "Your recognition is not required, Hauptmann. The authority comes from the United States Army and the Geneva Convention, which my country, unlike yours, still respects." He turned to Elsa. "Hauptsturmführerin Krüger, as the senior German officer after Hauptmann Müller, you will now be responsible for all prisoners in this detachment. Do you accept this responsibility?" Elsa straightened. "I do, Captain." "Very well. Hauptmann Müller will be transferred to the main POW facility at Fort Bliss, where he will serve 30 days in solitary confinement before joining the general German prisoner population." As Müller was led away, he turned to Elsa with a look of pure contempt. "Verräterin," he spat. "Traitor." The accusation hung in the air long after Müller had been removed from the detachment. Elsa knew that in many ways it was true. She had betrayed the ideology she had once embraced. The rigid worldview that had seemed so certain in Germany had crumbled in the face of daily reality at Fort Bliss. That evening, unable to sleep, Elsa walked to the stables to check on Thunder. The night was clear, the vast Texas sky alive with stars, unlike anything she had seen in Europe. As she approached Thunder's stall, she was surprised to find Captain Washington already there, offering the stallion an apple. "Couldn't sleep either?" Washington asked, not seeming surprised by her appearance. Elsa shook her head. "Müller's accusation. It's been echoing in my mind." "Traitor," Washington nodded. "A heavy word." "But accurate in a sense," Elsa admitted. "I no longer believe what I once did, what my country still fights for." Washington considered this. Is it betrayal to abandon a lie once you recognize it as such? Or is it growth? "It feels like both," Elsa said softly. "Everything was so clear before. Black and white, good and evil, superior and inferior. Now—" She gestured helplessly at the world around them. "Now you see the full spectrum," Washington finished. "The complexity, the humanity in those you were taught to dehumanize." "How does one rebuild after such a fundamental shift?" Elsa asked, the question as much for herself as for Washington. "One day at a time," he replied simply, "with humility, with openness to new truths, with the courage to question everything, including yourself." As September arrived, bringing slightly cooler temperatures to Fort Bliss, news of the war's progress reached the detachment with increasing regularity. The Allied forces were advancing across France following the successful Normandy landings. Paris had been liberated. The Soviet army was pushing westward through Eastern Europe. Germany's defeat, once unthinkable to Elsa and her fellow prisoners, now seemed inevitable. This realization brought new concerns. "What happens to us when Germany surrenders?" Greta asked one evening as the women gathered in their barracks. "Will we be sent home immediately?" "I don't think anyone will be going home immediately," Elsa replied honestly. "Germany will be occupied. There will be consequences for what our country has done." "For what we have done," Johanna corrected quietly. "We were part of it, even if just small parts. The acknowledgement of collective responsibility was new. Months earlier, such a statement would have been met with indignation or rejection. Now it was accepted with solemn nods. "Captain Washington says there may be an option for us to remain in the United States after the war," Elsa continued, "as displaced persons if returning to Germany is untenable or undesired." This possibility had been discussed privately between Elsa and Washington, but it was the first time she had shared it with the other women. The response was mixed, some looking intrigued, others troubled by the idea of not returning to their homeland. "Stay in America?" Margrethe Steiner asked incredulously. "After they've destroyed our country?" "After our country tried to destroy entire peoples," Elsa countered, her voice steady. "Let's not pretend Germany is merely a victim in this war, Margaret. We've all seen enough, learned enough to know better now." The frank acknowledgement of German crimes was another milestone in the prisoners' evolving perspective. News of concentration camps had begun to filter through even to Fort Bliss, though the full horror of the Holocaust was still emerging. For women who had been part of the Nazi apparatus, even peripherally, this reckoning was painful but necessary. "I don't know if I could face my family again," Helga Weber said softly. "Not after what I've learned here. Not after how my thinking has changed." "Then perhaps America is your future," Elsa suggested, "a place to begin anew, without the weight of the past." "With Negro cowboys teaching us to ride horses instead of putting us in chains," Greta added, with a hint of irony that revealed how profoundly her worldview had shifted. The comment drew surprised laughter from several of the women, the first time they had been able to find any humor in their circumstances. It was, Elsa realized, another sign of healing, of humanity reasserting itself over ideology. In early October, as the detachment prepared for the approaching winter, Captain Washington called Elsa to his office. His expression was serious as she entered. "Please sit down, Hauptsturmführerin," he said, gesturing to a chair. "I've received orders regarding your unit." Elsa felt a flutter of anxiety. "Are we being transferred?" "Not exactly. The War Department has been monitoring our experimental program here. They're impressed with the results, particularly with how you and your women have adapted and contributed to the detachment's operations." "That's why it is good news, I hope," Elsa said cautiously. Washington nodded. "Very good news. They're expanding the program. More German POWs will be integrated into similar agricultural and skills training detachments. Your unit is being cited as a success story." Elsa felt an unexpected surge of pride. "I'm glad our cooperation has been recognized." "It's more than cooperation, Elsa," Washington said, using her first name for the first time. "It's transformation." The psychological assessment team that visited last month was particularly interested in the evolution of attitudes among your women, and in you. Elsa tensed slightly. "We've been studied, then?" "Yes," Washington acknowledged, "but not as specimens, as examples of how exposure to a different reality can overcome even the most entrenched ideology. Your journey from SS officer to someone who works alongside Black American soldiers as equals, it matters. It suggests a path forward for post-war Germany." The implications of this were momentous. Elsa had been focused on her immediate circumstances, on managing day-to-day life in captivity. She hadn't considered that their experience might have broader significance for how Germany might rebuild after the war. "There's something else," Washington continued. "The War Department is establishing a special cultural exchange program for select POWs, who have demonstrated exceptional adaptation and cooperation. The program would involve touring other parts of the United States, speaking about your experiences, contributing to the development of re-education initiatives for when Germany is eventually occupied. And you're recommending me for this program," Elsa concluded. "You and any of your unit who wish to participate," Washington confirmed. "It would mean leaving Fort Bliss, traveling under supervision, but with considerably more freedom than traditional POWs. The offer was both tempting and terrifying. Fort Bliss had become a kind of home, a safe space for Elsa's evolving identity. The thought of leaving, of facing a wider America with her newfound perspective still taking shape, was daunting. "May I have time to consider?" she asked. "Of course. And to discuss it with your women. This is voluntary, Elsa. No one will be forced to participate. As she left Washington's office, Elsa found herself walking instinctively toward the stables. Thunder nickered in recognition as she approached his stall, his massive head extending over the gate to greet her. "What do you think, old friend?" she murmured, stroking his velvety nose. "Should we see more of this strange country?" "Horses are good judges of character," Sergeant Brooks said, approaching from the tack room. "If Thunder trusts you, that's good enough for most folks." "Captain Washington has offered us, a place in a new program," Elsa explained. "Traveling to other parts of America, sharing our experiences." Brooks nodded thoughtfully. "Sounds like an opportunity. Chance to see that America's as complicated as the captain says. Good and bad all mixed together, trying to live up to its promises." "I'm afraid," Elsa admitted, surprising herself with the confession. "Here, I understand my place. Out there." She gestured vaguely toward the world beyond Fort Bliss. "Fear's just nature's way of saying something matters," Brooks said simply. "Wouldn't be worth doing if it didn't scare you a little." As they spoke, a thought occurred to Elsa. "The horses. What will happen to them if we leave?" "They'll still be here," Brooks assured her. "Fort Bliss isn't going anywhere, and the program will continue with new prisoners." Elsa's hand rested on Thunder's neck. "He's become important to me, more than I expected." "That's how it goes with horses," Brooks smiled. "They get under your skin, change you without you noticing until one day you realize you're not the same person who first climbed into the saddle." The metaphor wasn't lost on Elsa. Her journey at Fort Bliss had indeed transformed her, as surely as her daily work with Thunder had developed new muscles and new instincts. That evening, Elsa gathered the women to share Washington's proposal. Their reactions were mixed: excitement, apprehension, curiosity, concern. After an hour of discussion, it became clear that most were inclined to accept the opportunity, though Margaret Steiner and two others preferred to remain at Fort Bliss. "I'll inform Captain Washington of our decision tomorrow," Elsa concluded. "For those who wish to participate in the program, we'll likely be leaving within the week." Later, alone in her bunk, Elsa opened her journal for what might be one of her final entries at Fort Bliss. "Tomorrow I will tell Captain Washington that I accept his offer," she wrote. "I cannot return to being the person I was before coming to this place. The certainties I once clung to have been replaced by questions, by complexities, by the simple truth that humanity cannot be categorized according to the theories I once believed. Sergeant Brooks, Private Johnson, Captain Washington, these men have shown me through their actions what no argument could have conveyed. They put us on horses instead of in chains, offered dignity instead of degradation, and in doing so, they freed me from chains I didn't even know I wore." The day of departure arrived with a crisp October chill in the air. 19 of the 23 German women had elected to join the cultural exchange program, with only Margaret Steiner and two others choosing to remain at Fort Bliss. Their possessions, the few personal items they had arrived with, and the small treasures acquired during their captivity, were packed and loaded onto the trucks that would transport them to the train station in El Paso. Captain Washington had arranged a small ceremony to mark the occasion. The entire detachment gathered on the parade ground, the same space where the German prisoners had first arrived 6 months earlier, uncertain and afraid. "When you came to Fort Bliss," Washington said, addressing the assembled group, "you arrived as prisoners. You leave as participants in a new chapter of understanding between our nations. What you have learned here, about America, about yourselves, will be part of rebuilding a Germany that can rejoin the community of nations in peace." He turned specifically to Elsa. "Hauptsturmführerin Krüger, your leadership has been instrumental in the success of this program. Your willingness to reconsider deeply held beliefs, to adapt to new circumstances with grace and intelligence, exemplifies the best of the human capacity for growth and change." Elsa stepped forward, deeply moved by the recognition. "Captain Washington, Sergeant Brooks, all of you, you have shown us an America we did not know existed. You have treated us not as enemies to be humiliated, but as human beings capable of learning and contributing. Whatever happens after the war, we will carry this experience with us, It has changed us in ways we are only beginning to understand. As the formal ceremony concluded, the women were given time for personal goodbyes. Elsa made her way immediately to the stables, where Thunder waited in his stall. The stallion seemed to sense something different in the air, his usual greeting more subdued. "I have to leave, old friend," Elsa told him, stroking his powerful neck. "But I won't forget what you've taught me, how to communicate without words, how to earn trust rather than demand it, how to find freedom even in constraint." "He'll miss you," Sergeant Brooks said, appearing beside the stall. "Horses remember people, especially those who treat them well." "I'll miss him too," Elsa admitted. "And the lessons. Not just about riding, but about everything." Brooks nodded, understanding the depth of what she was trying to express. "You know, before the war, I trained horses professionally, had a small ranch near El Paso, planning to go back to it when this is all over." "You'll be excellent at it," Elsa said sincerely. "What I'm saying is," Brooks continued, "if things work out the way Captain Washington hopes, if some of you folks end up staying in America after the war, there might be a place for someone with your way with horses, Thunder included." The offer stunned Elsa. "You would? You would consider working with me, after knowing who I was, what I represented?" "I consider who you are now," Brooks said simply, "who you're becoming. The past matters, but it doesn't have to define the future." He extended his hand, a gesture that would have been unthinkable months ago. Something to think about, anyway. Elsa took his hand without hesitation, the simple human contact symbolizing how far she had come from the rigid SS officer who had arrived at Fort Bliss. "I will think about it, Sergeant Brooks. Thank you." As the German women boarded the trucks that would take them away from Fort Bliss, Elsa looked back at the detachment that had been their home and their crucible. Captain Washington stood at attention, offering a formal salute that acknowledged them not as prisoners, but as fellow soldiers on a different kind of battlefield. The struggle for understanding across the chasms of ideology and experience. Beside him, Sergeant Brooks and the Buffalo soldiers returned the salute, their dignity and professionalism a final, indelible image of the men who had challenged everything Elsa once believed about race, about America, about the nature of human worth. The trucks pulled away, carrying Elsa and her companions toward an uncertain future in a nation still at war with their homeland. Yet as the familiar buildings of Fort Bliss receded in the distance, Elsa felt not the despair of the captured, but the tentative hope of the liberated. In her journal that night, as the train carried them eastward through the vastness of Texas, she wrote, "Today we left Fort Bliss, not as prisoners being transferred, but as people embarking on a new path. When we arrived 6 months ago, we expected chains and instead found horses. We expected degradation and found dignity. We expected to maintain our certainty in the face of enemy propaganda, and instead discovered truth in the simple reality of daily interaction with those we had been taught to despise. The true prison was not Fort Bliss, but the ideology that blinded us to the humanity of others, and perhaps to our own humanity as well. Whatever comes next, that is a prison from which I have escaped forever. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.